Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
All right, episode 12.
Episode 12, lucky number 12.
That's right. Today we're going to talk about, I think you called it basically couplehood. And essentially that means how we parent together, whatever your partnership is between two parents, right? And how you make decisions. One of the things I was sort of blown away by, on one of the episodes we were talking, and you mentioned that you didn't feel that parents often talk about before they have kids how they're going to raise the kids. And I said to you, like, oh, you feel like, parents don't often have those conversations. And you said that you feel that they rarely, almost never have those conversations.
Almost never, I would say.
And if you're coming into this, you're about to have a child, what do you think is important to do beforehand? Like, do you think is important?
I think that with regard to, we could go back to just dating, right? Mm-hmm. Dating someone, thinking that this is a serious relationship. You might want to get married or have kids. I think one of the most important things to do is to get to know your potential partner's history, their background as a child.
Why do you think that's important? I mean, that kind of happens naturally, but you're coming to it from a parental, like, what was it like? What were your parents like?
Yeah, exactly. Because I find that unless you receive some sort of instruction in parenting, the typical pattern is to either react against what your parents did, or to accept that as the norm and try to recreate that.
You kind of take on whatever you grew up with. You either push against it, like that was terrible, I'm not going to do that, and even if it is bad, sometimes you take it on intuitively anyway because it's what you grew up with.
Right, exactly. And I can't tell you, Greg, how many situations that I see where one of the partners says, to me, as they're getting some education in parenting, one of the partners says, well, I was hit as a child and look, I turned out fine.
You've had people say that to you?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, because there's a blind spot to really, there's probably a lot to it because then whatever you're tangled up with your parents and how you were raised and all of that stuff.
Right.
Like, why wouldn't you push back against that?
Right, exactly. But I can't tell you the number of times that I hear parents not push back and say, and it's a defensive mechanism, I think. They're defending the way they were raised.
Yeah, sure.
They're defending they're defending their parents in some way. Also remarkably, in my opinion, the number of people that I hear say, yes, we can have a child, but don't expect me to do anything.
One of the
parents
says that.
Yes.
Okay.
I know. It's a bit of a flabbergasted sort of moment, right? Mm-hmm. And yet these people go ahead and partner up and have the kids.
So you're talking about how important it is maybe to understand expectations before you go down that road. And you also said, in your experience, very few people do that.
Very few.
Or maybe you do it sort of vaguely, but you don't really sit down. And so you're saying even in the dating phase, if you feel you're getting serious and this is someone you might spend time with, it's important to talk about their childhood just to see what they're bringing to the table?
Exactly. And just as important, I think most or a lot of couples at least discuss whether they want children. That's
Sure.
kind of one of those make or break it sort of points. If somebody doesn't want kids and you do, you generally don't continue to date that person, right? So most people kind of flesh that out, I would say. But very infrequently do they say, well, kind of what was your childhood like? How were you raised?
Disciplined.
Disciplined, encouraged. What goals do you feel like your parents had for you? Did you feel like you met those goals, or did you feel like you rejected those goals, or did you feel like you had the freedom to choose your own goals? Because all of that history that we drag around with us through our childhood plays a part in how we parent. It plays a part if we believe that we can instinctively parent.
What do you mean? It plays a part if we believe we can instinctively parent.
Like if we believe that being a parent is a simple project.
Like I got it.
I got it.
I was raised.
I was raised. I
was
survived.
A child. Look at me. I have all my limbs. I've got this.
Exactly. As opposed to, and I think we've talked about this in a previous episode, as opposed to this idea that becoming a parent means that you are taking on the most challenging job of your life or role that you will have in your life.
Yeah, you've said it's the most important job you'll ever have.
Exactly. And if you don't want to think of it as a job, just think about it as it's the most important responsibility you'll ever have. Because for a large number of years, you are responsible for somebody who is more vulnerable than you, and you're responsible to make sure that they're A, safe physically, and B, that they grow up in a healthy way, psychologically or internally.
Well, even, and none of that is easy. And like you've said before, like in any other scenario, you're getting some training. Any other job, goal, whatever you want to have, it's like you really have to work hard. And I guess you've said in your experience that most parents come to it instinctively. Like, we'll figure this out on the fly. I was raised. We'll figure it out.
Right. I survived.
I'm
survived.
alive. And so let's keep the kids alive.
Right, exactly. And clearly keeping the kids alive is a very important goal.
Yes, sure.
Right? There's no question. But how do you keep them alive?
Well, in a way that you said is healthy and that they thrive and feel comfortable. So it sounds like a couple things. So if you don't have a conversation about that beforehand, or if you don't take some time to sort of look at that piece of yourself as a parent, you just kind of go for it, you're going to run into some issues.
Right, exactly. For example, I know that my daughter and son-in-law, before they got married, talked about how they wanted to handle screen time with their child prior to age 3. Because what we know from research now is that really the amount of screen time for kids under that age should be very, very limited. And under the age of 2, really, it's recommended that they not have any screen time at all because of the developing brain. Mm-hmm. And so they talked about that. How are we going to handle that?
Well, I would imagine it's easier. It just makes sense. And I kind of want to go through some of the things maybe you should talk through potentially before you actually have the child. Because I would think in the moment then it's also more loaded. If you're suddenly in the middle of it and dealing with it, it's more complicated as opposed to taking the time, whether you're in a relationship and you're going to have kids or someone is pregnant and you're going to have the child, to have these conversations beforehand. So then if it's problematic, you're not or if you have differing points of view about it, you might have some space and time to sort of work through it and come to an understanding of, how do we feel about electronics, which may evolve over time.
Yes.
But if it's in the moment of the father giving the kid the phone and the other partner is like, well, what the hell are you doing? It's going to get crazy, right?
It is. And, look, I don't mean to suggest that you can cover every single situation that's going to come up for you.
Right.
And when
it's going to evolve regardless of how much talking you do beforehand.
Sure. I mean, just in the case of my husband and myself, we couldn't have talked about screen time. There wasn't screen time. We were back in the old days, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the most we had was television. We talked a little bit about that, but we didn't have internet back in the day. So there are going to be also topics that you can't talk about because they don't exist yet.
Well, it also seems like you're going to start to establish this as a thing that you do, I guess, right? So as these things come up, because obviously there's going to be things that come up that are unexpected and you don't know are going to happen. But like you talk about this a lot as building sort of a wealth of experience of something.
Right.
So if the idea is like, hey, we're going to establish this thing, and I'm sort of talking idealistically because I'm like probably a lot of parents that listen to this. Like, I know my wife and I both wanted kids, and we generally probably talked about it, but we never sat down and really had a specific conversation about how do you feel about, athletics, screen time, sleepovers, whatever it is.
Right.
And your point is that this is important to do before the child comes.
Yes. And I also realize that most people listening to this podcast already have children and are past this dating stage.
Sure.
So maybe it's something they can impart to their children as their children grow, that this might be a good conversation to have.
Or they can start putting it into the relationship now, right?
Well, exactly. So really, the bulk of what you and I want to talk about, I think, on this topic has to do with, okay, you probably didn't do that, but it doesn't mean that you can't do that. And I think that there are maybe two primary factors, if we're talking about couplehood, that become important in raising kids. One is keeping the couple alive.
What do you mean when you say that?
So revisiting why you became a couple to begin with. So you frequently hear it put out there as, be sure to keep date nights after you have kids. Be sure to have alone time with each other after you have kids. And these are high and lofty goals that often get pushed to the wayside as the reality of the logistics of having children come into play.
Right, because they start to dominate your life. So
unquestionably.
and yes, I'm well aware. With 3 of them, I'm well aware of this. So that idea is that if you keep the relationship strengthened outside of what it means to be parents, that you're going to be better parents, you mean? So it doesn't just become, you hear that's sort of the classic thing, that the couple sort of falls apart in terms of their relationship, and it all becomes about taking care of the kids and the scheduling, and that's their whole existence.
Exactly. And the conflict that arises naturally and expectedly around having children. You're going to have conflicts. We can't avoid the conflict that's going to come up, the conflicts, multiple, that are going to come up between partners. The conflict is part of it.
Yeah, of course. It's going to happen.
Right.
It's so intricate to raise kids. It's so much work. I've said this before, even the work we've done, whether it's taking the parenting groups with you, taking the workshops, it's still hard as hell. It's hard.
Oh, it is. And, most of the time, even with parent education, there's a certain amount of parenting that we're doing that's kind of flying by the seat of our pants.
Well, there's going to be some of that.
Has
right?
to be.
Right.
Has to be, right? We can have general ideas about what it's going to look like or what our values are or the techniques that we want to use. But there are going to be conflicts that come up that if it's brought into the couple part of it, the romantic, the intimate part of being in a couple, and I'm obviously speaking to dual parent families as opposed to single parent families, although I'm also speaking to couples who are divorced, right? We're not talking about intimacy in that setting necessarily, but we are talking about the need to still parent together. So if you think about in a dual parent household, the kinds of things that can come up around parenting that can cause you to look at your partner with criticism and judgment and forget why you got married or partnered up in the first place, because it's so all-consuming, this task of parenting. So I feel like for the healthiest possible arrangement, we need to take care of ourselves as a couple.
Well, I like that you even said that it's important to have it sort of separate, like to have a date night. Obviously, you're probably going to talk about your kids a little bit that night maybe, but that it doesn't become about how are we going to parent this? How are we going to handle it? That you almost have that as a separate conversation.
Yes.
And have your date night be about you, which makes absolute sense. It's like if you can strengthen that, it's just going to make the other stuff easier, the conflicts that come up if your relationship is strong.
Exactly. And I look at it, Greg, as kind of self-care for the couple.
Sure.
So we've talked about self-care for the individual in previous podcasts and likened it to if you're on an airline and the oxygen mask drops from the ceiling, put the mask on yourself first and then help the person next to you. So this is a couple's mask. You have to put the oxygen on the couple, and then you can think about and take care of the family as a whole. So I feel that that's really important to mention. And if you're a single parent and listening to this, put the oxygen mask on you. Remember what makes you in this, and don't make it all about the parenting. It's got to be what feeds you.
Well, it's
as an
also
individual.
the parenting is just going to suffer, right?
Well,
Obviously, if
absolutely.
you're not happy, if you don't have self-care, if the relationship isn't as strong as it could be, it's going to affect everything else.
100%.
So what are some of the, whether it's you're doing this leading into having kids or you already have kids, like what are some of the things you should try to get on the same page about, or at least understand about each other? Are there specific things that you talk about?
Well, I think, yeah, sure. I think understanding each other's history is important. And here's why. Not only because we're either doomed to repeat it or doomed to react against it, but understanding somebody else's history so that you understand why your partner might be behaving that way in a moment, and why you might be critical of how that behavior is affecting the family dynamic. Because maybe, I'm going to just put it out there, maybe your partner's actually doing it right. But because your history is in a family where that was a trigger, let's say.
It played out, sure.
Yeah. So you're more likely to jump on your partner in that situation. But if you understand what your triggers are, and you understand how they were parented and why they might be coming at it from a particular angle, it gives you the opportunity to push the pause button and not jump into the fray.
Right, into the conflict.
Yes.
That sounds, I agree. I think that's a great idea. I think so you're basically talking about self-reflection, and you might be able to do that on your own, and I think you can, but you're also sort of really talking to me, I think, about a pretty deep concept, is being able to take a pause, especially if it's conflict, if it's anger, if it's, an explosion. Why is this going on? Right? So I think you can do it within yourself. I'm a proponent of therapy. I think that's another place. Like if things keep coming up, whether it's individual therapy, because that kind of sort of deep self-reflection to say like, why is this going on, is not an easy thing to do.
No, it is not.
and I think, couples therapy is really important too. That's another place. Like if you're not, and sometimes you can sort of talk through on your own, right? Within the marriage, within the partnership, to say, why is this going on? This is what I'm feeling. What are you feeling? And you can definitely do that. But I also just want to encourage listeners. It's hard because I still think out of maybe big cities, there's still really this stigma around therapy that somehow you have to be really screwed up or mentally ill or some sort of tragedy going on to go to therapy. And you really don't. I think couples therapy is really about helping with tools, how to handle situations. So I'm totally with you. I think this sort of self-reflection piece is great. And if you can do it on your own, it's great. But people shouldn't be afraid to get some help that's really only going to deepen your own experience of yourself, your partner, and your kids.
Exactly. And here's what I would say, because not everybody can afford therapy.
Sure.
And, our healthcare system doesn't value
mental health
and providing for that kind of support. But, most of us, I think, have a friend who pretty much has a good head on their shoulders. I certainly have a good friend who has a good head on her shoulders. And, prior to my husband and myself having therapy, and we haven't actually done couples therapy. We've done some individual therapy around some trauma that, parents dying and that kind of thing that has happened to us. But prior to being able to afford that, and let me just be very clear that my husband and I began life here in New York City in poverty. We couldn't afford the subway fare, which was like a dime, 25 cents back in the day. But, we had respective friends that we could really talk to who would give us a generally balanced point of view.
Right. Wow, that's really important. I totally agree with you. I think if you're in a situation where you have health insurance and you can't afford a therapy, that's a great place to go. But you're totally right. I think a confidant
Yeah.
A friend, and ideally the friend that's not going to tell you what you're going to want to hear.
Exactly.
Or maybe a couple friends. It's sort of like in New York City when you ask directions, you have to ask 3 different people and then you get the consensus because they all have a slightly different thing to say. Like you might have a couple people you go to. And I guess what you would say is, I guess what we're trying to avoid is that explosion, right?
Yeah.
Between the partnership that can get out of hand.
Sure.
So going to a friend is, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I think. What's your take? Is that the idea?
Yeah. And, and to ask them to be honest. And if you don't have a confidant like that, go to a community leader that if you are religious and have
involved in a church.
Either have friends, in that situation or acquaintances in that situation, or a leader like a priest or a rabbi, an imam or whatever, right? You can go.
You can find places.
Exactly.
And it's important to do that, right?
Right, because we really can't do this on our own. We rely.
Well, it's much harder. I think it's much harder.
Much harder to do.
It's kind of a longer road. I think that's been my experience. I'm still sort of baffled. Why do you think most parents don't really have a specific conversation about how they feel about parenting before they have kids?
I've come to think in all of these years that I've been doing it, that there's something about having kids that parents think is natural.
Oh, that they don't need to because we're just going to figure this out. It's going to be fine.
Right. I mean, from the kind of biological perspective, the human race has been around a long time.
Yeah. I mean, there is a part of you are going to figure it out.
Sure.
You
absolutely.
jump in, you got to jump in the deep end and like, hey, sink or swim.
Right.
But I guess the idea is that if you can have these sort of conversations, it's just going to make that, it's just like getting help. It's going to get
so much easier.
Yeah, it's going to make the road easier,
It's
right?
going to make it so much easier. And, I speak from the point of experience where the road was not easy for my husband and myself at the beginning. We made a lot of couple mistakes, right? Partnership mistakes in terms of raising kids, because we started out on the same path that everybody else does, thinking we want children.
We love kids. They're so great.
They're so
and
great.
We both love kids.
Both love kids, and it's an extension of our love for each other. And, I had a lot of book knowledge about raising kids and having kids and developmentally what goes on. And we were like, we're all set. Yay us, So I'm speaking from experience when I say that if we had had the knowledge that we acquired along the way, and the techniques that I now teach to parents, and the available communication between the two of us, if we had had that from the start, it would have been so much easier. It just would have been easier. Now, did we make it? Yes. We have grown children. We didn't kill them. They didn't kill us.
They're thriving.
Have great relationships with them. We're going on 40 years of marriage. Yeah. I mean, we made it. And could it have been easier? 100%. If we had just figured it out a little bit earlier.
Right.
Which is why I teach, right? Because it doesn't have to be as hard as it sometimes is.
So all of that's great. So why don't we maybe to talk a little more specifically now, do you have like one technique that parents can sort of bring into this when they have a child? They're starting this journey of parenting.
Absolutely. And the technique that I like to look at and ask parents to contemplate when they are walking into any situation in which there's a conflict, right, is who has the responsibility for solving this problem? So sometimes I call it, is it your monkey? So there's an old Ukrainian saying, maybe, it's not my monkey, it's not my circus. So what that refers to is that if you're not in the arena, right, if you're a bystander to the conflict that's going on, don't immediately jump in. It's not your conflict. It's not your monkey.
What is a real world example of that? You mean if one parent is having a conflict with the child?
Right. If one parent is having a conflict with the child. So, it comes up 4,000 times in every session I have. So let's say.
But what's the problem that people are bringing to you in that situation? That the other partner has jumped in, or they don't know how to handle it if it's two parents and one kid?
Yes, and. So let's just take a simple situation. I mean, let's say that one parent buys an ice cream for the child on the way home from school. And the kind of standard in the household is you can only have one treat a day. And both parents maybe even know that, but
they've talked about this. This is something that's been established.
Right, exactly.
This is how we feel about desserts. So they're
right?
on board with each other.
Right, exactly. Okay. But both parents aren't there when the ice cream is bought on the way home from school. Right. So parent number one comes home. The kid has eaten the ice cream. It's now after dinner.
They've gotten, let's say they've gotten the ice cream truck after school or something.
Right.
With parent number one. Then they come home.
And then they have dinner. And the child says, ooh, can I have another ice cream? And parent number one, who was with the child, says, no, absolutely not. You know that we had the ice cream on the way home from school.
And let's say this is playing all out in front of the other parent as well. Now is there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right? So now parent number two says, oh, come on, let them have another ice cream. What's the big deal? Meanwhile, the child has gone off to the freezer and is helping themselves to the ice cream.
So this is already kind of a nightmare because, so let's take that scenario that parent number two says that. Okay.
Right.
So that would be obviously now you're undermining the other parent in that situation.
Exactly. So the question that parents need to ask is, I'm hearing this conflict. So parent number two in this situation should think to themselves, I'm hearing this conflict. Should I step in or should I not step in?
Well, I feel like often in the groups when this comes up, you say not to step in.
Correct.
It's the job of the other parent. So let's say that the other parent doesn't say like, oh, come on, because that's one thing. If the other parent says like, what's the big deal? Let him have the ice cream. That's a whole nother thing.
Exactly.
But let's say the parent is just there, because I've been in this situation.
Yes.
And do you step in and help? Either one, right? Like, I'm going to back up mom or dad.
Right.
Then it's 2 against 1, and that's kind of weird. I don't know. Your point is that in those situations, this is what you'll say in the group, is like, whose problem is it? When the parent is asking you, like, I didn't know whether I should do this, and you're like, whose problem is it? Who is the conflict between?
Exactly.
And that's who it should be between.
Right. Because if you're not in that mix, it's not your monkey. It's not your circus. You step out. You don't step in. So let's just take that scenario, right? Parent number one is arguing with the child. In this case, it's about having a second ice cream for the day. It doesn't matter what it is. Could be about brushing teeth. Could be about the child being rude to parent number one. Mm-hmm. Don't talk to me like that kind of thing. It's critical that the problems stay between the two people wherein it exists.
Well, what about in that scenario when you just said, like, because I've sort of been in this situation sometimes with my wife where she wants my backup, right? And then I'm always feeling, not always, but sometimes I feel stuck because this comes back to valuing both points of view, because I've been in situations where it's not that I agree with my child, but I kind of see their perspective. I also see my wife's perspective. So I don't feel comfortable, but she'll feel sort of run over. And I guess and so I'm always stuck with like, I don't really want to jump in, but she wants my support. So are there times like when you said, let's say in this scenario, the kid is rude to the mom and I'm standing there. Is that a situation though where it's okay for me to jump in and say, don't speak to your mother like that? Is that different? I mean, is there shades of gray to this thing?
Oh, there's always shades of gray to everything, unfortunately. I wish everything was black and white. Sure, there are shades of gray. So in that situation, what I would ask is, and this is the way really we talk about figuring out who owns the problem. So ask yourself in that situation, who has the upset feelings, right? So the primary upset feelings in the situation you described, right, are going to be between like your wife and the child. Your wife probably has the primary feelings, right? But you've overheard this. You have upset feelings too, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So who are your upset feelings about or with?
Well, they might be with both. Depending on the situation. But if my child is being super rude to my wife, I'm upset with the child.
Right. So then you have the responsibility of solving that problem. In other words, you would say to your child, I feel extremely angry when you disrespect your mother.
But that might be at a different time, right?
Could be.
Because you're saying maybe in that moment, I mean, this thing with them being rude is a little bit extreme. So let's say they're just having a conflict and I'm having feelings about it. It seems to me what your point is that it gets messier when it's triangulated and there's three people, that if there is a conflict, and you say this about siblings too sometimes, like,
yes,
I love that part too, this idea of whose problem is it? That sometimes it's between the siblings and they need to work it out, and it's not your job necessarily in that moment to jump in and fix it. Whose problem is it? So this thing with the parents, it almost seems like it's cleaner to let this conflict be between the two people, especially if you weren't there. You weren't there earlier at the ice cream truck. You don't have all the knowledge, and it's hard because you might have that impulse to jump in. But it seems like you're saying, like, this is a circle back maybe. Whether I talk to them both individually at a different time, but it could make it messier if I kind of jump into that moment.
Well, especially if we think about how are you jumping in. So when a conflict comes up, we have to, first of all, figure out who really has the responsibility for solving this problem. So the conflict, and we'll just go back to the ice cream scenario, is between the child and parent number one, right? So parent number one really has to set the limits because it's their problem about the child having double ice creams. In the case of a parent number two, right, overhearing this, then what parent number two can ascertain is that the problem exists between parent number one and the child, but they can jump in if they are jumping in supportively to help parent one and the child figure out the solution.
So as almost a mediator.
Yes.
Or if the parent number one is asking for help. I struggle with that one sometimes, though. It depends on the conflict, because then I feel like it can be a ganging up on the child. I mean, if the circumstance is extreme enough, I sort of get that. But I'm always just kind of stuck, like, especially if I don't have a lot of knowledge. And also, it's always annoying to be the parent that jumps in when you don't know and try to take over or fix it. I mean, my wife and I both have done that. Like, would you stay out of this? You don't even know what's going on.
Exactly. Well, and I honestly, I believe the cleanest way to do this is to let the two people between whom the conflict exists work it out themselves, unless somebody's being hurt. And so clearly, we are not talking about cases of domestic violence here. We are not talking about somebody being sexually, psychologically, or physically abused in some way. We are not talking about that. But we're talking about the common everyday problems that occur around ice cream. So it's cleaner, actually, if you're parent number two in this scenario, for you to be supportive and say, you guys can work this out.
What about in a scenario if both parents are at the ice cream truck and then you're both at the house? So you've both been together and the kid has gotten the ice cream after school, and then you're home and you're both together and the kid starts losing his mind because you won't give him the second ice cream, and what's the big deal? And I've only had it once this week. And you're both there. I mean, is it a matter of like intuitively, like, who's going to take this one? Are you both kind of doing it together?
I mean, you could do it together for sure, as long as you're going to back each other up.
Well, right. I guess that's the key, is that you're on the same page. And this goes back to, so this is a great, it is kind of a great example of, like, if you haven't done the work before, it seems like a simple thing like ice cream. But if you haven't had a conversation about, like, how do we feel about sugar and sweets, that if that's happened in the moment, it's going to be so much harder to sift through, as opposed to if you've done some work leading up to it. Like, how do we feel about this? Which I don't know that we ever did. It's true. It's rare. You mostly do it on the fly.
Right.
But it makes it much more effed up, because then you're in that moment and you're like, how do you feel? And I might be like, what is the big deal?
Right.
But you don't want that playing out in front of the child.
You really, if it can at all be avoided, it's better to take care of it ahead of time so that you don't play it out in front of the child, because that's where kids find the wiggle room. They find the cracks in the system, and they learn to work the system, and they learn that, oh, so one parent's a little easier on this. So next
Sure.
time I'm not even going to ask the first parent. I'm just going to go directly to the second parent who doesn't know I've had 12
Right.
ice creams today.
They start playing them against each other.
That's why I think we've spent a little time today in terms of talking about how can you set yourself up for success in terms of parenting.
And can we just sort of recap this? Because I think this is an extended conversation, so maybe we can wrap up this episode and we'll do the next episode, sort of continue with more specifics. So
sure.
If we wanted to recap how you set yourself up for success, it's certainly, if you're coming into having a child, it's having these conversations beforehand about what your values are, like what else are you said your past, your childhood.
Yeah. And the thing is, Greg, I think it's not just one conversation, right? I think it's multiple conversations. And if you think about parenting as being that you are, protecting $1 million asset, right? Let's just put it in business terms. Let's say you've got a business that's worth several $1 million and you're in a partnership with this, with somebody and running this business, right? That's a lot of assets to be managing. You're not going to do it on the fly. You're going to sit down probably more than once a week.
Yeah, it's like an ongoing, ideally it's an ongoing conversation you're having.
Yeah, you
right?
sit down and you say, okay, so this came up this week with regard to this investment. And so how do we manage that moving forward? There's those kinds of conversations, and on a regular basis can often make or break the parenthood part of this or the couplehood part of this.
Like if you don't do this work, I mean, people get divorced over how
people get divorced all the time.
Parent their kids.
That's why I wrote the book Joint Custody with a Jerk. Because
a lot of times that's where marriage falls apart, is over. I mean, because it's so much harder. You read about that all the time too, is like when the child comes, it's so much more to it, right? And if you haven't sort of established that, it can fall apart. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it can. And the thing is, parents will say to me, I don't know, that's so transactional. It's too businesslike. I don't want to sit. I don't want to sit.
You mean they feel it's too formal to do like a literal sit down and let's talk about it?
Yeah, they do. But, it's really important if you value children as kind of the assets of the family. How do you want to do this? How do you want to be in a partnership around this so that you're on the same page as a parent?
What happens if the other parent is not down to sit down and talk it through, and your marriage
happens all the time.
Is it all the time?
Happens all the time.
Where one partner wants to dive in and talk about it and establish this, and the other partner is like, I don't want to do that.
Exactly.
And maybe even be like, we'll figure it out. It's fine. I don't want to sit down and make a list of whatever. It's too formal. You're saying that happens all the time.
All the time. All the time.
And is it, can we just say it? Is it traditionally more in a heterosexual relationship? Is it traditionally more the male that's not willing to kind of do that?
Yes. In a cis-het relationship, it's traditionally more the male.
And what do you do in that situation?
Well, given that it has come up most of the time, 90% of the time in the history of my doing this.
You mean when people come to you, that's one of the main things, is we're not on the same page. My partner won't do this work.
Correct.
Julie's nodding her
I'm
head
just
knowingly.
nodding my head going,
90% of the time. Wow, 90% of the time.
Yeah, 90% of the time.
What do you do? I feel like, did you say that one parent can do this?
Yes. So that's what I tell the one, because generally it's one parent that comes to me. It's not both. And I reassure them that, because they will often say, how do I get my partner on the same page? And I will say, well, communication is a beautiful thing, but if your partner absolutely won't get on the same page, here's what I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, because I have a huge history, right, with seeing only one parent be able to do this. It only takes one. It only takes one parent to use these techniques. It only takes one parent to know how to discipline.
You mean the techniques even we've talked through the first 10 podcasts?
Exactly.
I mean, ideally, both of you are doing it, but you're saying it only takes one.
It only takes one, because it is such a healthy approach children gravitate towards healthy approaches. They gravitate towards parents who are in charge and who feel comfortable being in charge, who have some knowledge under their belt. And that doesn't mean that they end up rejecting the other parent. Far from it. They still love the other parent, but they do recognize that there is a psychological health in terms of what maybe the only parent who's doing the work
Well, it
is
makes
doing.
sense. They're sort of intuitively drawn to that. You know, you just know that's a feeling that you get that, oh, they're trying to figure this out. Have you had situations where the other parent has come around just by the power of example?
Yes. Some people are very reluctant to engage in, what do I want to say, didactic learning. You know, the idea of kind of sitting at a school desk,
right?
Kind of
So
thing.
it feels too literal to them. So if it's experiential, they've come around maybe because they've started to see the shifts,
right? So they see it role modeled,
right?
And they see that it's working, and they're like, "Oh, well, that seems to be working." Well, so I'm going to do it that way.
In a particular, this kind of particular person too, I think sometimes if they don't feel pushed, that they'll come around to it on their own. If they don't feel they're pulled in, everyone feels that way a little bit sometimes. Is like, let me come to it on my own terms. And you've said that sort of happens. So if your partner necessarily isn't doing it, it's sort of the power example where I'm going to do this. And especially if they see results happening, I think they might come around.
Yes. Now, here's an exception to that rule. When one parent feels so criticized by how the other parent is doing it, and the other parent may not be overtly criticizing them, but just in the act of doing it differently, it brings up that defiance, that resistance, that defensiveness on the part of the other parent. And so what can happen, and this is a situation where it doesn't work out so well, is if one parent actively undermines the other parent, knows what kind of they've discussed or what the precedent is, or sees how the other parent is doing it and deliberately does the opposite. That is a
recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for disaster. It is not the recipe for a successful marriage. It's often the recipe for a successful divorce.
I'm sure you've seen a few marriages fall apart under that. Unfortunately.
And often the marriages are not healthy to begin with, right? And kind of on the rocks, but it's always a disaster. Sometimes a parent will say, look, I just can't do this, but I won't undermine you. So I will just step out rather than step in.
Right. But you're saying that's enough because one parent can do it.
Because one parent can do it. Correct. Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.